Welcome back, guys. Today we are going to tinker on the K24 just a bit and try to get it ready to put into the car for the first time, or at least hang it in the car for the first time. But before we get there, there's a lot of changes that have to happen to this thing, because if I were to go on and do it right now as badly as I want to, it's not going to tell me anything. It's just a waste of time. I'd get to look at it, say, that's cool, and pull it right back out. And that's not what we're here to do. The most important thing is I need to get a transmission mounted to this engine because it adds about 50% to the overall length of it. And that transmission is required for me to get an actual understanding of how to position the engine left and right, fore and aft. There's also a few pieces on the engine that I want to take off. I'm not going to be using the engine wiring harness, the power steering pump, things like that. Accessories that are no good and of no value to me, we're going to go on and take those off right now. I'm going to pull the exhaust manifold off because it doesn't tell me anything either. I'm going to have a turbo manifold on the car instead, and it's not going to be shaped anything like this, so we might as well remove it. I'm going to leave the intake manifold on, though, because even though that's not the manifold that I'm going to run, it's going to take up a similar type of room and space and give me a better understanding of the dimensionality of things, so we're going to leave it on. We will revisit some engine mounting questions and thoughts here in a bit once we're kind of further along on this. So let's get this thing taken apart, and then we'll start throwing some new parts at it, bolt a transmission to it, and maybe hang it in the car. Let's go. If you've never seen one of these, it is a clip pulling tool. And it's basically just kind of like a tiny, I don't know, spade with a slot in it. Really useful for pulling, whether it's door panels, plastic clips, all sorts of stuff. You wedge it in underneath and pry it up. Add one or two of these to your toolbox. So I've just taken the throttle body off of this thing, and it's not looking so hot inside. Here. So first things first, there's a lot of corrosion in there. Hopefully that's focusing. But I'm gonna spin the camera around you and show you what's inside of the intake manifold of this thing. 50,000 mile warranted motor here. Yeah, right. Look at that. Literally residue, like standing, what looks to be gravel. Let's see if I can reach any of it. I mean, like maybe coolant, but dude, it's like rocks in there. It like dirt, something. Really not good, not supposed to be in the engine. At least it's getting rebuilt, doesn't really matter, but I'd be bummed if I were gonna run this motor as is in my car. Okay. All right, so scratch that. Curiosity's gotten the best of me. I grabbed a spoon. I wanna see what that stuff is. I can't really get my hand in there, but I'm sure you guys watching are as curious as I am. Yeah. Tons of residue, and that's just like a small amount of what's in there. I mean, there's a lot in there. I mean, probably 10 of times that amount just here at the front of the manifold. I bet there's plenty at the back of it too. So yeah, I'm glad I'm taking it apart. So pretty much done with the disassembly. There's a few small things that I could take off of this thing, but I'm not really worried about it right now. I've just pulled the intake or the exhaust manifold off, and it's not looking a whole lot better on this side either. I've got two ports that look pretty nice, one that's pretty average, and one that's pretty disgusting. Check this out. So let's get a light running in here. Hopefully this will help a little bit. And this is our port that looks pretty normal. You know, that's how an exhaust port should look. This one, on the other hand, looks like a bomb went off inside of it. So, not so nice. You know, we got another decent looking one. And this one's okay. Not great though. I don't know what happened to this engine in the past, but it's not looking so hot. All right, let's pick this thing up and let's talk oil pans. All right, so oil pans. The one major issue that K-Series engines tend to suffer from is oil starvation problems. And you can solve that with a really good dry sump system, but the problem with the dry sump system is the cost. If I were to do this correctly, we're talking about probably $7,000 or $8,000 for the entire system, including the tank, the pump, the lines, the pan, all of that kind of stuff. It's a really good system when you need that, but there's a different solution, and it's a brute force approach, and apparently it works pretty well. This is a Unit 2 fabrication 9-liter oil pan, which is twice the oil capacity that this engine had from the factory. And this has something like 30,000 baffles and 60,000 compartments. It's not true, but it's built specifically to cure this problem. It alleviates the oil starvation issues that these engines are known for. So with this, we're gonna shortcut that. And I'm pretty lucky because my buddy Will Dries had this pan lying around by sheer chance. Getting one of these is a 6 to 9 month wait. Amir has one, he had to wait 6 months for this pan. Will had to wait 9 months to get his hands on this pan, and thankfully he decided not to use it and sold it to me for a very fair price. I'm really excited. He shortcutted the build process on this by 9 months. If I had to wait 9 months for a pan, we wouldn't be making super laps. So let's get this thing mounted on the engine. I don't have an engine stand at the moment. Obviously, we're working on the floor because Riley and I decided to cut the top of the engine stand off and use it as a mobile tubing bending support system. So we're just gonna do this the old fashioned way. We're gonna dangle it from the engine hoist and get this thing bolted up, at least temporarily. So it's been a little bit of a trial and error figuring out how this whole thing kind of comes apart and goes together. Turns out the oil pump needs to come off in order to fit this pan. I need to replace it with something called an RBP pump or RPB, something like that. I've got some research to do, but I've got the pump off. I know I'm gonna be replacing it, so I'm gonna go in and fit the pan up, and then we'll move to the transmission. The oil pan's on now. It's really only temporary, and for mock-up purposes, it doesn't really matter that there's not an oil pump in it because this whole thing is gonna be taken apart. I'm only using this as a core engine. I'm gonna send the bottom end out to be built, sleeved, forged rotating assembly, that kind of stuff. And then I'm probably gonna be putting a K20 cylinder head on this motor, so I'm not really, bothered by what state this thing is in. I don't need to have it, ready to run or anything like that. We're just mocking stuff up. Next on the list is the transmission. So let me show you guys what I'm working with at the moment. Right here we've got a 6-speed RSX transmission, and my buddy Amir at RS Future, who I hope most of you guys are familiar with at this point, he let me borrow this. This is kind of his backup transmission, and it's really only relevant to what we're doing because it's the same size, the same shape, and and overall fitment of the transmission I will be using. I'm gonna need something more robust than this because these won't handle a ton of power. Amir's already burned through quite a few of them before he wound up with his Samsonus gearbox. So I'm gonna be doing something similar. This is just to kind of get us in the ballpark and give us an understanding of what kind of mounts we need to make. So in order to mount this thing, eventually I'm probably just gonna order the correct hardware from Honda because 1, it'll be nice and shiny, 2, I know it'll be correct, and 3, it probably won't be very expensive. For now though, I'm just gonna go through my bolt drawers and find some metric hardware that will at least hold this thing in place. And with that, the engine should be largely together enough to start the mount process. I've been going through my bolt collection, which is pretty large at this point, for almost half an hour, trying to find bolts that match the thread pitch of the block of the K24. And I have quite a lot of metric hardware. I save bolts from everything for this exact reason. But you Honda guys gotta tell me whose idea it was. I finally gave up and checked. What uses M12 125? Whose idea was this? This is dumb. I don't have any M12 125 bolts. I have 2, and they're this freaking big. That's not gonna work. Out of probably 1,000 bolts, no M12 125. Who uses that? This is dumb. So now I'm at that point in the project where you have to stop, and you have to get in the truck, and you gotta go to Home Depot, hope that they have M12 125. I've never seen it before. So maybe they're gonna have it. If not, then I gotta drive like across town to the hardware store. So this is turning into a project, but gotta do what we gotta do. So here we go. I had to go across town because Home Depot didn't have them, but I finally got some M12 125 bolts. So let's get this thing put together. I'm tired of wasting time. Check it out, motor is in the engine bay now, and I'm stoked on it. There's definitely some stuff that we're gonna have to work through. Right now, the biggest one is that the oil pan is sitting on the chassis rail, and that's not gonna work. There are a few workarounds. The biggest one is I may have jinxed myself. I might have to go dry sump in order to make this thing fit the way I want it to. I could modify the deck lid or engine cover, kind of where the vents were originally. I don't know if I want to do that yet. I also got to see how much of a modification it would take, how much the engine would protrude if I leave it where it is. The other option is modifying the oil pan, which seems like it should be doable. That's the easiest way to accomplish this. I could modify the chassis itself and completely kind of redesign that section of it, but it's the main rail that attaches the front to the back. I don't have a huge interest in redoing it because it's going to remove a lot of structural integrity, and I don't see a good way to re-engineer it and redesign it to work. It would just be too big of a workaround, and there's suspension pickup points there, and at that point we're talking about back halving the car and doing a tube chassis, and this is much more easily remedied with a dry sump system. So worst case scenario, that's what we'll do. The transmission's at kind of an odd angle at the moment as well, but I think it's gonna wind up working a bit better once we lean the engine a bit, move it back some. There will be some chassis modifications on kind of a smaller scale in order to get this thing where I want it. But overall, it looks really good. There's a ton of room in this thing. It feels lightweight just looking at it. I think it looks really good. I'm excited. Let's actually show you guys what this thing looks like now that it's kind of propped up and in place. So, it's not perfectly positioned, but we're relatively close to where we want to be. In terms of left and right positioning, side to side, it's pretty spot on. It will move a little bit, but not a ton. It might look like it's really offset, but keep in mind, I'm gonna be sitting on the other side, and there is a lot of weight in this transmission hanging off one side of the engine. We'll wind up pushing it to the driver's side a little bit, but not a ton. Fore and aft is gonna be the big question. I want this engine to sit as far forward as I can while maintaining serviceability. The further forward that it is, the better the weight distribution of the car will be. Right now, the engine is completely in front of the rear wheel center line, which is good. It's better mid-engine layout. We're making improvements. I think the biggest deciding factor on where the engine will wind up fore and aft is gonna be the intake manifold. Right now, there's a few inches between the manifold and the front bulkhead, but the current intake manifold folds down off of the cylinder head. And so any replacement that I wind up with is probably not going to do quite the same thing. And I think we're gonna have to compensate for that by bringing the engine back or leaning it back. And leaning it is part of what we're gonna aim to accomplish here. The axle center lines that I was talking about, it's really not all that far off. I don't know how much you can really see in the clips, but it looks worse to the eye than it really is. And that's partially because all of the structural chassis bracing is aft of the rear wheel center line. It looks like it should be inline, but it's really not. CV axles can take up part of the misalignment that we're dealing with, which we're gonna do. I'm just gonna have to move the engine back far enough so that they're working, and I'm not putting them in a position that's gonna make them fail any quicker than they need to. Overall, I'm really stoked on this. This is a great first step. We are officially Honda swapping a Ferrari 308, and it looks awesome in there. I'm really excited to get some mounts designed and to kind of show you guys some of the CAD process in doing that. So I think next episode, we're gonna look at where the mounts actually are on this engine, where they're gonna kind of translate to being on the chassis, and then how we're gonna design them, what we're gonna make, how many revisions we're gonna have to do to really get it to do what I want it to do. But I'm excited about it. And once we get it mounted, it's game on. It really means the pedal gets to go to the floor and we get to start throwing parts at this thing and get the engine built, you know, do the turbo setup. And hopefully it won't be too long before we have a running car. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, subscribing. That stuff does a ton for me. I hate having to, you know, say it. It feels cheesy, but it's because it's important. That kind of stuff helps me as a content creator more than you guys know, so thank you for doing it so far. Thank you guys for tuning in, for watching this swap happen, for being a part of StanceWorks, etc., etc. I really appreciate it, and I'm stoked to keep these videos coming. Next time, we will be working on some engine mounts. I will catch you then. Thanks again.